Okay, we're back now with our last session of the day. So excited to introduce James Lopata, VP of Coaching and Supervision at AceUp, to run this last session for us. Thank you.
Great. So we're thrilled to be here. We've got an amazing panel here. We're going to be talking about the building blocks in particular for building your diversity, equity, and inclusion cultures. And we've got an amazing panel. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves with a couple of sentences about themselves, and then we're going to go through, and each one will give an important block that you can use to build your culture. And so why don't we go in order of the blocks for the introductions, and then we'll do the blocks afterwards. So I'm going to ask Keami, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, James. Hi, everybody. I'm Keami Lewis, and I lead people and organizational development at Toast, which also includes the diversity, equity, and inclusion function. Prior to Toast, I led teams in HR and global diversity and inclusion and talent management across a couple of industries. Most recently, I was with PIMCO, which is asset management. I also worked with Facebook, Microsoft, and New York Times before Toast. And just for context on this conversation, Toast does, we focus on serving the restaurant community. So we serve large and small customers, and we offer a range of technology that combines point of sale, front of the house, back of the house, and guest facing technology. So really happy to be here. Thanks.
Terrific. And next up in order is David.
Hello, everybody. David Delmar Senties. I am the founder and executive director of an organization called Resilient Coders. It's a very highly competitive, free and stipended nonprofit coding bootcamp for people of color from low-income backgrounds here in Boston. We train folks up for careers as software and connect them with jobs as such. We are very much focused on the economic well-being of our Black and Latinx residents here in Eastern Massachusetts, concerned with economic parity and justice. And so our work is focused exclusively on that.
Terrific. And last but not least, we've got Reed.
Hi, everybody. Reed Bundy, and I have the privilege of being the final panelist in a 2-hour session over lunch. And so I'm super impressed by the continued engagement here. I think that's just a sign of the fantastic panel. So I'm happy to be here. I'm with Mimecast. We're a cybersecurity company. We focus primarily on email security, on cyber education for organizations of really all sizes. My focus is on social impact, the employee experience, and also diversity, equity, and inclusion. And really, my focus is to ensure that our focus on cyber resilience ties directly to our commitment to community resilience and ensuring that we are doing all we can to serve the organizations that not only are our customers, but the market that we live and that we serve. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. And I'm James Lopata. I'm the Vice President of Coach Supervision at AceUp. We are a coaching company that provides coaching throughout organizations at scale, affordably. And I'm a coach supervisor, which means that I oversee kind of the larger vision for how we coach entire organizations to leverage coaching for the benefit of all, for the benefit of value creation. Part of my background, I worked on Wall Street for several years in digital consulting. And I'm also the board president for the Massachusetts LGBT Chamber of Commerce. I've been very involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion issues for many, many years, particularly in the early days of Wall Street before there were even employee resource groups. Which I've got several battle stories, but we're going to focus on the panelists today. We've got 3 amazing panelists, and we've had to cull down their amazing knowledge to 1 item each. And the first building block, let me go through the 3 of them just briefly. The first building block will be from Keami, which is a building block around foundation. David will then give us a building block around sustaining and growing. And Reed will complete us with a more external facing building block around corporate social responsibility. So Keami, could you share with us your first building block and maybe some sort of relevant way that people could apply it?
Sure, definitely. So building any foundation poses a couple of really important questions and decisions to be made around exactly what are you doing, what are you trying to build, and how are you going to know when it's finished, right? So in this space, the questions that come up all the time are, how do we move the needle on diversity, equity, inclusion? Where do you start? How will you know you're making sustainable progress? And how do you know that how do you get it going in a meaningful way? And these are all questions that I think many of us have been grappling with over the past few decades, particularly. I'm going to offer a couple of very tangible, tactical things that more than likely are not going to be rocket science to many of you involved in this work or thinking about this work. But before I do that, I'm also going to share 3 different approaches, because I think that is the most meaningful nugget that I'll pull from my experience in the past, because 3 of my companies took a very different approach to this. And I think they all worked, but they came at it from a different way. And that might be the thing that is the thing. So I'm going to do that first. So the first company was incredibly focused on a targeted, systematic process for driving and measuring change in key areas. We did that through the use of a maturity model that helped measure and direct our efforts as we move through the phases. And that's the piece that I'm going to focus on, where you'll get a lot of the actual tangible things that you need to do. But the point was really looking at the process as an evolutionary process, while simultaneously meeting each business group where it was. So really the nugget there is looking at it in its whole and building out what you need to have in place. So things that would drive representation, inclusion, business impact, build it all out at once. The second company took a different approach, where they said, you know what? We could do all that stuff, but it's really focused on transparency, accountability, and saying the hard stuff that nobody's saying. And I'll let you try to guess which company said that, because I'm not going to tell you. But the point is that they took the bull by the horns and said, look, here's what happens. Let's talk about this in a very raw and distinct way. We're only going to focus on the 4 things first that really matter. They have to do with hiring, promotions, and the biased things that happen there. And we are going to unpack that like nobody's business. And then, we'll still bring up the rear with the data and employee resource groups and all that stuff. But we're going for the jugular with this, and we're going to hold people accountable. And then the third group, the approach was really around speed, agility, quick decisions. They went straight for client and customer impact, which I thought was just remarkable. And the speed at which we did it was remarkable. Employee empowerment and engagement was remarkable. Again, all 3 and many others that I've talked to have taken some of the foundational blocks that I'll talk through in just a moment. But the approach is just as important as what you do. So how you do just as important as what you do. And I think each group got to where they needed to get in a different way. But again, one focused right for the jugular, one went transparency and accountability, and one said, let's build the house. Right. So in building the house, the building blocks that I would say are really, really critical are having a mechanism for data and analytics. You need to be able to measure what you're doing. You need to have a cadence and for communicating outcomes. The things you're measuring are representation. Who are you hiring? How are you moving people up, down, and through the organization? You're also inclusion. How are promotions, transfers, employee engagement, retention, equity? How are all of those things happening? How is it aligned with the policies that are out there? And then finally, there is the business impact, the customer impact, the external impact. Who are you partnering with? How are you driving innovation, flexibility, and capabilities? And in those spaces, you need your leaders involved. The other thing you need is a strong learning platform. So in building out your foundation, you need a foundation for basic awareness and bias training, everything from that all the way up to your targeted learning initiatives. For example, one of the ones that we used for talent acquisitions managers was how to help them influence hiring managers to make the hires that you needed to make that you were measuring. So little things like that to look at the full learning capacity for building capability. And then the other piece that I would say is really ensuring that you do have that employee engagement involvement. I'm not going to talk about ERGs and DEI councils because I think they're coming next, but those are definitely a piece to think about. What is the role they're going to have? What decisions will they make? What budget will they have? So how do you set them up? And then finally, the external focus. How are you engaging with vendors, your recruiting partners, your community, and your customers? So it really is a full-on package. As I mentioned, the maturity model is that I've seen, you can work through all of those things because they give you little indicators of what to do in each box. But having all of those in place and determining how you're going to tackle it is what I would suggest.
That's wonderful. Amazing. So much out there. I have one follow-up question. So you talked a lot about the metrics, which, of course, we know is really helpful to have the evidence behind it. And I work with a lot of growing companies, and so some of the companies you've worked with are huge. They have huge budgets. So when you think about metrics, sometimes it's hard to get all of those metrics initially. What might be something that somebody could focus on pretty easily to start off with? I know it can be sensitive to ask employees, about their diverse backgrounds and stuff like that. What might be a metric that people could really grab onto and start to work with first?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. And I'll say this, a lot of our early metrics were in Excel spreadsheets with glue and paste. So trust me, we didn't have the fancy stuff when I first started. So you can do this, okay? I think a lot of the HRS systems actually have the metrics in there. They have the tool to capture that information if people decide to do it. But some things you can do, even if you don't collect diversity, all of them, things that you can take a look at is as you're going through your talent processes, as you're looking at your succession plan. Are there diverse people on the talent succession plan? Are there key people? What percentage are they? One of the recommendations that one of the companies had is as you build your succession plan, you had to have 2 people on there that were different. Like, you don't need any metrics from that. I know who my team is, right? I know if they're different from me. And so that was one thing. Do all of the succession plans have 2 people on there that are different from yourself that could be ready in 2 years? And how are you developing them? It's very simple. As you're bringing candidates in and people transition from applicant to candidate, what does that pool look like? Who's on the panel that's interviewing and who's on the candidate pool? We know that if you have more than one on the candidate pool, there's the odds of actually increasing the diversity. So some of those things, you don't need like highfalutin metrics to do it. But if you have them, it really does help you parse out how individuals are experiencing your culture and experiencing all the processes within your culture.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So that's setting the foundation. So we're going to turn to David now. And so we're starting to get people in. We're starting to make sure that I've got different people around me. How do I sustain this? How do I get real empowerment? How do I hold people accountable, David? What's going on?
Yes, great questions. So first of all, a shout out to metrics. Having a metrics-based assessment of how you're doing in terms of I think it's wild how often that sort of escapes the conversation. And thank you, Keami, for all of that, and especially for bringing it back to metrics. I always say that if a company is in business, it knows how to set goals and achieve them, right? So I also celebrate the fact that nowadays we have some leaders that are really taking it upon themselves to think differently who and how they hire in advance. But this is not always the case. Something that we experience here at Resilient Coders, by the way, a big part of the function that we do is connecting our graduates with jobs. And so we spend a lot of time in this particular part of the funnel. And one of the comments that comes up from random employees is, I wish my company were hiring differently, but what can I do? I am but a lowly software engineer, right? And so one of the things that we have been focusing on is, what does it look like to talk to employees and really foment an employee-led movement, right? Organizing from the ground up, establishing a groundswell. Leadership hears it. Ideally, there's a conversation to be had where leaders say, oh, this means a lot to you. That's awesome. Sometimes it is the case that leaders are really not at a point where they're listening to it. And so the employees have to come together, really organize and agitate. To borrow some language from community organizing, right? They have to sort of agitate and express to their leadership that this is just not a negotiable thing, that this really means a lot to an activated employee base. And so I think that employee engagement is absolutely critical in the scaling of anything that has anything to do with DE or I, right? And often it is actually the very beginning. One of the steps that have happened in the past with some leaders is that they establish a sort of like kind of tokenized DE&I program that is really not really E or I, right? And so what some of our activated employees have been pushing for is recalibration of power, right? Is our program predicated on the recalibration of power, or is it tokenizing, right? And then figuring out what it would look like to come up with frameworks of accountability. I don't think any of us have time for me to sit here and talk at length about what that looks like, nor does anyone want to forestall their lunch any longer than they have to listen to me go on and on. But one of the things that we have found is that most folks who present resistance to a groundswell of activated employees are either don't want to or don't know how. And so we tell all of our activated employees, you got to recognize folks for who they are and where they're at, whether it's don't want and don't know how, and work with them, incorporate them into part of your process. I'm happy to, if anyone has questions about this, I'm happy to sort of post a link into the chat in terms of like a living document that we're starting to pull together based on the conversations that we're having like this with activated employees at different companies. And also, I'll throw my email out there too, because I can talk about this stuff all day long, but I won't do it right now.
So this is great. I like the emphasis on metrics and really employee agitation. So I'm curious, can you share like a little success story about how this has worked effectively with the employees really taking the lead?
Absolutely. Most of the time, it's pretty straightforward. It's employees get together as a group. We always encourage folks to find each other first, so it's not just one person. Folks find each other and they approach leadership and they say, look, this really means a lot to us. We really want to see this happen in a meeting, Megacorp LLC. And more often than not, the CTO of Megacorp will say, that sounds great, let's do it. Usually they put it back on the employee and say, all right, so what would it look like to craft such a thing, which is awesome. And sometimes it doesn't happen, right? And if it doesn't happen, that's when we get into the realm of like petitions and organizing. We did have one of our companies recently, they actually circulated a petition and presented it to their leadership and said, look, this really means, and we're just not going to take no for an answer. That is thankfully not very common, right? More often than not, leaders want to do it. Most people, in my experience, are of the don't want to, don't know how. Most people are don't know how, right? And they are sort of like allies in waiting who just don't really know how to make it happen and would love to engage their employees such that they build a pipeline or a product that everyone is bought into and excited about.
Great. I can visualize that. That's powerful. Thank you. So Reed, can you take us a little more externally now? So you do a lot with corporate social responsibility. How does this begin to create an outward facing, or how does this begin to move outward in organizations? And why is that important? And tell us, a building block that you suggest.
Yeah. So for starters, I don't even want to be a panelist. I just want to sit and listen to David and Keami. So I'm frantically taking notes here. So, but I guess I'm already locked in here. So yeah, I mean, I think to start, I guess one kind of point of clarification or context setting is to never conflate CSR and I, right? And while with my team, I happen to oversee both of those functions. The employee experience, I think it's a real danger to move it to start sort of using them interchangeably, right? Because certainly, we see D&I as a core ingredient to our success and to differentiating us. And I think that's where it really it gets back to, by the way, is anyone getting feedback? Because I'm getting
a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit,
right.
But I think
we'll power through.
We can hear you well enough. We're getting the content.
Okay, good. All right, well, just raise your hand. So for my team, there are three legs of the stool. There's the employee engagement piece, corporate social responsibility piece, EI. I've got individuals who oversee each of those functions. We really see those as concentric circles where there's not always going to be total overlap, but they are absolutely critical to one another's success. And so, David talking about getting that ground support from employees and ensuring that it's really grassroots in nature. Absolutely 100%. You know, and so when we look at our CSR programming, to give a little context, so I've been with Mimecast for just under a year. I left a company that had exponentially higher CSR budget than where I ended in Mimecast. And we have some budget, but the fact that I did that, I had a lot of people say, like, why would you make that change? And it was because what I saw in the culture and in the commitment to really thinking beyond kind of the writing the check and checking the box and sponsoring the gala, really weaving it into the business model, the differentiation, and weaving it into what we do in terms of how we support our employees, how we grow people, we find new talent, and really reinvest in the community that we live in, that we work in. You know, I like to call out that we're a South African company, roots from Africa. We are we were founded 14 years ago, 15 years ago. And there's no question that racial disparity is obviously part of South African history, and it's something that we continue to hold close to us as we think about build out our program, as we think about our nonprofit partnerships in each of our markets. So our primary markets are here in Boston, in London, in South Africa, Australia. And so that really rings true in who we partner with them. And that kind of going beyond the gala, right? We try to find those partnerships that can really reinforce this idea of building more resilient communities, building a stronger, more diverse workforce. So a couple of examples that I'll give you. So we work with Europe, fantastic organization, they have national scope. And frankly, I don't really, well, galas don't really have this, but I don't really care about the gala. I care about how do we create that shared value. Not only support an organization that is underrepresented throughout Boston, the country, but frankly, how does it benefit our business and allow us to grow as an organization? So we've brought on multiple interns. We've recruited one and hopefully a few others from Europe, and we're constantly looking at those periodically. We're constantly looking for those types of partners. We could really expand our talent pool and really, I love the this idea of kind of really honest conversation. Go for the jugular, right? I think that was Keami, right? So with that, I'll actually just pivot quickly to the DEI side of things. I think it's important. So we're right in the middle of that going. We have a head of D&I with us in March, and we're going through the full audit right now. So I give the shout out to what we're in. And taking that hard look and kind of owning the fact that we got a lot of work to do, and tech in general, as we all know, has a lot of work to do. Loved Chevy in his opening comments talked about misinterpretation of Jackie Cochran. That's worried. And to me, that's the type of honesty that we all need to have. I'm not going to stand here and say that we're crushing it when it comes to DEI. We are not, but we're focused on it and we're committed to these ones.
Great. Naila, you're in. Can I have a follow-up question, or where are we at?
Okay, yeah, we're right at 1 o'clock. James, go ahead
Okay.
and ask a follow-up question to wrap it up. And we'll end this. We just want to be very cognizant of everyone's time. Thank you all. Go ahead, James.
Yeah. Just one thing. Somebody wanted to double check your 3 concentric circles. I think they were employee engagement, CSR, and DEI. Okay. So in terms of value, you talked a lot about creating value. And I'm curious, what is the value that is really created? Like, why do we do this? What is the value to the company? What is the value to the customers? Keami began talking about how one of our companies really focused on the client. What do you see as the value to really doing this for a company? I mean, you're there to raise revenue and to do things for the community. What is the value?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a business perspective, for me, the bottom line is about. Right? And not only finding the absolute best talent and finding talent from a far broader spectrum of a lot of tech companies that work with that. But the reality is, none of us are really going back to the office in the next months, maybe ever, right? What differentiated tech companies a couple years ago, pool tables and beer carts, ping pong tables. What differentiates companies now is commitment to truly walking the walk, to being a purpose-driven organization. Particularly when you look at millennials, particularly when you look at the fact that there's not a lot of turnover right now with a lot of these companies, given the environment. So, strictly from a business perspective, this is an opportunity to really showcase that we are a purpose-driven organization and we're committed to it.
That's brilliant. I want to thank everybody. I learned a lot. There's a lot to apply here, but it was also very targeted. So I want to appreciate the panelists. Thank you, Nayla. And I'll turn it back to Nayla.
Yes, thank you so much, James, Reed, Keami, David. This was really a dynamic group, and I want you all to know it was fantastic having meetings with them and pulling this content together. I mean, they are in it. They're all in. So with that, we're going to wrap up. This is our final session of great content. Thank you so much to this panel. I'm going to talk to everybody out there who's left. And there's there's still a lot of you left. We are aware that we promised some networking and we wanted to kind of push it to the end. I know it's right, a little bit past 1. We are going to keep the forum open. If you're interested in speed networking with everybody here, you just have to click the little networking button on the side and it will put you in. It's automatically generated. You'll be matched with whoever's in there and you'll have 4 minutes. You will have the option to accept or decline. Nobody will know. So with that, panelists, I think we're finished. Thank you all. There will be a lot of follow-up with follow-up content and enjoy your day.
Thank you, Mima. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.